Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, April 15th. So my schedule's still messed up quite a bit, so things are going to just continuously be weird as far as times I stream and just how much extra time I have to stream. So we're starting earlier today than I'd really like to. Just because specifically there's not going to be a ton of news, although it is also Monday, so even if I'd started very late today, there would be not that much video game news. So I've not really accomplished too much as far as the what I used to call accountability section and have now just evolved into calling catch up section. But I did start to do some more proper gameplay testing on my Steam Deck, and one of the things I did was finally download all the information. Like, you install Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel on the Steam Deck, and then that's maybe a gig or two, and then the first launch it wants to download 9 gigs worth of card art and stuff, so it's not particularly the most ideal game to have on the Steam Deck, but what you're going to have on your Steam Deck to play, or any console to play, or any computer to play, is going to be 100% around what you actually want to play. I did, as I was running my clips macro to make clips from the last live stream, I did have the opportunity to launch and play almost a complete full game of Clue. So I definitely see where there would be advantages there of in the non-setup phase at some point, whenever I get to my Steam Deck down to where I really want it to be set up, and I'm not just trying to adjust things or test programming or test games to see how well they run. I could definitely see just having my news macro run, opening up news tabs to talk about, and then having a good 15 to 20 minutes worth of time to whip out the Steam Deck and play a game. It is effectively a very small computer, smaller than a laptop, much more manageable. Now I am having a real problem though finding a home for it. Like, by which I mean my organization skills are lackluster, and I just have not picked a good place or side table or something to say this is where the Steam Deck goes. Inherently, I need something like that because there is definitely a case here where I could put my Nintendo Switch and Steam Deck in the same positions and then have them ready to go. Of course, there's some contradiction there, and I think this is a contradiction that would happen to most people, in that you really want a long HDMI cord or something that would go across the room, because the TV that you would want to plug a Steam Deck into, the monitored TV, and the TV you would want to plug a Nintendo Switch into, are obviously almost always going to be across the room. Whereas both of those devices make a lot of sense, particularly in a bedroom, to be next to you, next to your bed, on a side table. And those two locations are never going to be next to each other. Not unless you have something really weird set up, like a TV on the ceiling or hanging over a bed somehow. Or you have one of those really expensive Scorpion style chairs that has a monitor attached to a chair that then can tilt up and down and all of that. Which I'd kind of love to have one of those, but I also would have to admit that there's just no financial way you could ever really justify that unless you're just filthy rich. And none of those Scorpion-style gamer workstation chairs have actually taken enough steps into being something that would either be medically needed or comfortable enough that you would actually want to sleep in it like every night. And that's really where I think it would have to go, is that you would have to have effectively a bed that you can put mattresses on, that you can tilt up and down, that could then also tilt up into a gamer chair. And yeah, even for disabled people, just having like medical beds and wheelchairs is a real problem. Staying in one place, you need effectively an air mattress that has special pressure sensors to inflate or deflate, or they get bed sores. And that would be, I guess, the anti-bed sore air mattress for one of those stations would be the next step that you really should have. And I'm saying one of those Scorpion workstations needs to be like a bed, because inherently, unless you are filthy rich and have a lot of space, which you probably would, you kind of want one to replace the other. Or I do, at least. But yeah, those are all fantasy, way too expensive items. And I'm on a side tangent here, certainly. The point I was trying to make is, yes, I'm playing the Steam Deck. I have yet to find a place to really put it on the side table. In part, there's a fear that my side table has a lot of glasses of water, and I don't want to spill water on the Steam Deck. But I don't know where else it really is going to end up going. I also, on top of playing a full game of Sudoku, I mean, not Sudoku, of Clue. Sudoku would take a lot longer. Played Grow Up a little bit to see how that worked. I actually played several games, and several games don't work. And there is definitely that possibility that there is just a lot more games that are not really playable on the Steam Deck. You know that, and you should definitely know that going in before you buy a Steam Deck, is that there are lots of scenarios here where games admit that they are completely unplayable, or Steam will say that they are in one of the mushy middle two sections. But even at that, I played Fez, and Fez says it's Steam Deck verified. Fez, the first time I launched it, I loaded a save file and the graphics wouldn't load in. And the second time I launched it, I made a new game and the audio wouldn't play. So this is from desktop mode. Maybe from gaming mode there's some different compatibility, but one would assume that that is not the case at all. But yeah, it is highly concerning if games are labeled by Valve as being deck verified and then it not working. That being said, I also have to admit that I installed a script that expanded the swap file size. It is an incredibly small amount of swap file at only 1 gigabyte by default. Now, maybe that's because the RAM is so incredibly fast on the Steam Deck that they don't want you to use a swap file because the NVMe speeds are just so much slower, relatively speaking. They're still very fast. But yeah. So I changed it, and maybe that was a mistake. Certainly, it could be a case that is why Fez is not running well. But in general, settings being changed and tweaked, as far as the swap file alone, should have done nothing at all other than improve things and make it a better experience to have more tabs open on Chromium or Chrome or Firefox on desktop mode. It probably rubs Steam and Valve the wrong way that they even have to have a desktop mode, and it's pretty obvious that their focus is not ever really going to be there to support things being tweaked and changed. But Valve, at least on its first iterations of SteamOS, is not trying to have a completely locked down hardware or completely locked down software, just only mostly locked down hardware and software. But yeah, things like Costume Quest 1 do not run correctly, but Costume Quest 2 does. But then Costume Quest 2 is a direct continuation of the story of Costume Quest 1, so that's not helpful, really. Unless you just are going to have people play Costume Quest 1 on some other PC first. It's not realistic, though. It's not a good solution. Yeah, a lot of that's gonna, almost all that probably is eventually gonna fall onto the developers of games to make sure that their old games are more compatible with Steam Deck. But then the Steam Deck would have to be fairly popular. Way more popular. Yeah, with every bit of popularity, that's going to be another opportunity to convince developers to touch their old games. But it kind of needs to happen too, because we are getting to a point here where Windows 10 compatibility, Windows 10 support is gonna go away. And I don't know if there's really going to be a lot of people that want to move to Windows 11 that haven't already moved to Windows 11, or that can move to Windows 11 considering all the limitations. And Windows 11 seems to me like it's just really, really bad visually in what it's adding new features for. And it's not really making a good sales pitch, and never really has, as far as you need this upgrade. One of the things that I think might lead to a less accurate description of how capable the Steam Deck is that you're going to have early adopters like me, which I'm not even that early of adopter. I waited till months after the OLED version was announced to buy it. But you're going to have those kinds of tech literate people having strong gaming PCs in the first place. And so then the game streaming, where just the audio and video is being streamed to the Steam Deck and all the hard processing is going through your gaming PC, that is going to massively increase the compatibility to basically any game that runs on your gaming PC. I'm not sure if there's really any real exception there. and it's going to drastically change the experience. So there's a little bit of dishonesty if you get the feeling like all your games are playable, but in reality most of your games are actually just being streamed on the local network. And what will also feed into that is if you have like video game journalists that are working out of their home on their local network all the time, singing the praises of the Steam Deck, when the scenario of I'm going to have this be in the hands of a kid and they're out and about, if they're in the car, how many games can they really play if they don't have internet, if they don't have a PC that they can stream the games from? Yeah. There is also a fairly large, shocking amount of games that don't have pass and play or two-player on a single screen, split screen two-player features. Yes, that has been an issue for PC gaming for a very, very long time, but the Steam Deck exacerbates that problem in a lot of ways. Playing Clue, for instance, a version of Clue that is incredibly expensive and full of microtransactions and is really terrible. Hasbro ripping people off as usual. But yeah, playing that, there is really no way to do a pass and play on Clue when there really should be a pass and play, because there's just never been this idea that you would have a Steam Deck like device, and that you would pass the device over, or pass the mouse and keyboard over. You could always have passed the mouse and keyboard over, but it just wasn't really something that anybody would focus on. So the play with friends on Clue, for instance, is play with friends using a friend code online, which gets back to the idea that the Steam Deck really needs to be able to connect to other Steam Decks without any internet around. So inherently, I think it's going to have to put some pressure that will probably be ignored onto Valve, to rethink how often their DRM is checked, and rethink how often Steam really wants or demands to be connected to the internet. Which honestly, it probably doesn't demand being connected to the internet that much anyways, because from what I've heard is the way the game sharing worked before the new family sharing beta was that one person would start playing a game and then disconnect from the internet, and then the second person could start playing a different game, or the same game even. I suppose, I don't know how big of news it really is, but I definitely wanted to talk about it, and I stayed up late last night watching the Amazon Prime Fallout series and just marathoned the entirety of what's there. 8 episodes, I believe. There's a lot of references in the series. If you are a fan of, that was probably the wrong one to bring to the hand, but whatever. If you are a fan of the Fallout series, that being said, I am not sure that anyone is as good of a fan to get all the references, because I'm not sure anyone is super fans of what would be Fallout 1 and then Fallout 2, and then Fallout 3, and then Fallout New Vegas, and then Fallout 4. Yeah. The Easter eggs, I think in a lot of ways, are easily overlookable. And to me, in the fact that I've mostly spent my time playing Fallout 3, it felt like a large amount of what was being shown in the Fallout TV series was more inspired by Fallout 3. There's some spoiler things, I guess, slight spoiler things I would say. First of all, the biggest thing is that the female lead is not really the lead of the show. It jumps around a lot between 3 people, in that there's the ghoul bounty hunter character class. There's the female lead, who is the vault leaver, a raider class at best. She sometimes starts to feel like a raider. And then there is a Brotherhood of Steel guy who you don't really early on in any Fallout game, I think, get to play as a Brotherhood of Steel character. Yeah, in kind of direct contrast to Skyrim, like you don't start in different character classes in Fallout. You always start coming out of a vault as a new player, learning everything again. So yeah, that might be an interesting twist, certainly, is that if there were different factions and you could start either as a Brotherhood of Steel member, or an Enclave member, or a raider, or a vault dweller. I think maybe Fallout New Vegas really does some little bit more of that, and that you can decide your backstory a little bit more. But yeah, the main thing to say is that the ghoul character is the real main protagonist of the show. He gets way more airtime than the vault dweller does, and her story and growth is not anywhere as interesting, in my opinion. And then the Brotherhood of Steel guy, overall, I think is probably the least focused on. There are also a lot of celebrity cameos and just random people, and weirdly a lot of flashbacks, and that is, the flashbacks themselves are inherently tying into the ghoul character, because he is a ghoul who has been there since the beginning, before the Fallout happened 200 years. This is set 200 years after the bombs fell, which also puts it in a timeline, I think, fairly early in the Fallout games, because I think Fallout 3, for instance, was in the was 400 years after the bombs fell. Now, what we get into big spoilers, and I don't want to get into too much spoilers there, is that the TV series doesn't really seem like it has any care to hold back any secrets or be beholden to what any of the games do. Not surprising, that is always the ego of television and movies, and it is inherently going to be the problem of video games being converted to TV and movies, is that you're going to have to almost certainly say that some elements in the TV series are just not going to be canon with the video games, particularly since they're going to they are going to make new Fallout games and probably change the canon anyways. The Fallout TV series is in LA, so it's on the West Coast, where a lot of what we've seen has been on the East Coast. And there's a better advantage in Fallout 3 in particular to have it on the East Coast because it has a lot more of that raw American exceptionalism propaganda feel to it. Whereas the flashbacks in particular really point out that the America before the bombs fell was not the right America either. It was still, like, even though it looked like it was in the 1950s, it was actually about 100 years into America. They said, I think it was, that the United States of America had 350 years before the bomb fell. So, like, it's way into the future. So there must have been some, if there is an actual split line between a point where the real world's reality and history happened and where Fallout's history happened, it was well before the vaults were created and well before the bombs fell. And that might be an interesting story to tell, but it would be probably a boring story to play. And it definitely wouldn't be a Fallout game. Now, I do think they probably should think about making a Fallout 0 or a Fallout Year 1 game. Something where the bombs have just fallen and you are a survivor who is not in a vault. And so there would be limited opportunities to get into a vault, or your main goal would be to get into a vault, and it would be a lot more just chaos in the streets, running and gunning, surviving that initial Fallout situation. And that might be an interesting way to potentially try and reboot the Fallout series and do a spin-off game that's more exciting. Hand a game like that over to somebody else other than Bethesda, who are going to definitely just keep on doing the same things they've been doing unless somebody stops them. But yeah, they effectively in the last episode spoil a lot, and they basically tell you how the vaults were created, why the vaults were created, which are things that I think in the games themselves they really have not explained, because it's more entertaining, frankly, for that not to be explained. Yeah. The 1950s style Americana in the flashbacks are inherently not accurate. The ghoul character in his flashbacks, which, that if you didn't figure out that the flashbacks of this actor character is the ghoul character, you'd be incredibly confused, and Fallout as a TV series would just not be for you. I doubt anybody actually wouldn't figure that out, but if that was the case, I could see I could see certainly somebody being upset if they didn't figure that out. But anyways, the ghoul character in his human form was this Hollywood actor, and he's married to a African-American lady. He has a mixed-raced, it seems, African-American daughter, and nobody's questioning that at all. In fact, in flashbacks they go out of their way, and overall throughout the entire series, they go out of their way to have a lot of females and a lot of African Americans show up in roles that don't quite make a lot of sense. It implies that there just wasn't that level of racism in their history, which fine and well, but they really are going out of their way to hire more minority actors in the Fallout universe, which is fine, because it doesn't really accomplish anything or change anything other than you get to see more female people here and there. It is a little weird that you have something called the Brotherhood of Steel, and then one of the characters is female presenting, because you would think that with the word Brotherhood it would be only men or boys, but honestly it seems to me like in the games, I vaguely recall that was true in the games too, is that the Brotherhood of Steel had female people too, so yeah. The Brotherhood of Steel really doesn't do anything other than to be a faction, and I will say the Enclave is mentioned, but basically not really shown. Dog meat is mentioned, or there's a dog very much like dog meat in the show for fan service, but he really doesn't do too much in the whole series. They actually introduced too many characters overall. Inherently, they had to stretch, it seems, just to make 8 episodes for a season from the video game, because even though you can spend hours and hours and hours playing a Fallout game, the vast majority of that is being in vats doing shooting and grinding and RPG elements, and they didn't even try to depict that, because how can you depict that, really? You can do a wink and a nod somewhere that sometimes a character will get a new gun, and it does feel very video gamey in some points, where you'll see a character pick up a new gun and get an upgrade or a new piece of armor, and you'll see rad roaches showing up here and there 2 or 3 times, but they are very much just there for half a second and getting shot. You know, in fact, you basically are taking a round trip tour before the last couple episodes, where you're just seeing enemies that you would have seen in the Fallout games, just to show them off. They have exactly 1 episode where there's a little bit of toplessness, but the main female protagonist doesn't go topless, which is very odd considering she willingly at the very beginning is brainwashed in such a way that she's happy to have sex with a complete stranger at the very beginning of the game. And I guess at the very first episode you see the butt of that complete stranger, but then the rest of the episodes have like no nudity at all, and yeah, there's it just doesn't seem like the Amazon Prime, this doesn't have to be rated for TV effect, or the HBO Max effect really is in play. There is blood and gore, but not even that much blood and gore compared to just a Walking Dead thing. There's a hard point there where you basically would have a hard time comparing the Walking Dead TV series to the Fallout TV series, because I think the Fallout TV series really is stealing more from the video games and just kind of retelling very similar stories from the video games, since the video games are so open, whereas the Walking Dead TV series drastically changed from what the comic book series was at the very beginning, and then was just getting shifted by different writers to different directions. So it really was its own thing. And yeah, I question if anybody would enjoy or like the Fallout TV series if they didn't have some familiarity with the video games, to the point where it also gets overwhelmingly stupid when you have, in like the 7th episode, somebody saying war never changes, which is just the catchphrase of Fallout. If somebody says that and they've never played video games, they're going to think, oh well, that's a really impactful, well thought out line. And then if you've played the video games, you knew exactly what they were going to say, and it's just like, say the line, Bart, effectively. But yeah, the dog is a great example of just something you really can't do too much with as a character. The budget on the show, it looks good, but it is somewhat, I think, cheap or lower on scale than you would have expected. Lower than probably some of those full green screen Marvel Disney Plus shows, and those budgets are already kind of low. So instead of seeing vast open worlds with a whole bunch of different places and locations to visit, you mostly see environments that have a wall backdrop set up pretty quickly and pretty easily. Let's see. Am I gonna win here? Probably not. Which, yeah, they go to a lot of places, but unlike the video games, they're kind of just backdrop locations. Like there's a Super Duper Mart, which may not actually be the name of the markets that they go to, but it's obviously just kind of a side quest location, and there's really just nothing special, no story going on there. Inherently, I think the biggest flaw of the Fallout TV series, which overall I think is fine, is that it's decent enough for a single watch, perhaps not worth rewatching until they make a second season and you want to recap. There's a recap, I think, with every episode at the beginning, which is, I think, a little unnecessary, but I could see if you were watching it on a weekly basis, it would be helpful. But they also shoved out all the episodes at once, so nobody's really going to do that on their first watching. But yeah, inherently in Fallout 3, you go into an area and you get those sound effects, which all those sound effects that are so good in Fallout 3 are missing. And you'll have a well-written title of a quest line pop up. And so let's just make something up. You may go to a city and then it would say Patriot's Point or Mystery of Patriot's Point. And then you would have that quest line, and that quest line would lead to this standalone side mission that would have a beginning, middle, and end narrative as to what was going on at that one place, what you're investigating, what your goal is, and all of that. Whereas in the TV series, she gets the female protagonist lead. Well, not really. She gets in the super duper mark and kind of just stumbles around and then eventually leaves 5 minutes later. And the only main theme and story and side quest there is that she's learning lessons about how dangerous it is to live outside of a vault in the wasteland and how terrible the wasteland is. And that feels like, for the most part, that's almost all of the episodes except for the last episode. It is just trying to get a new audience. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Yeah, part of this minor emergency is people potentially calling me in the middle of streaming. Yeah. There's some weird connections, I would say, with the Fallout thing, in that they connect it to New Vegas fairly heavily at the very end, and this is only a slight spoiler, which you would think that they wouldn't really want to connect the story that much to New Vegas, but then I don't know how you'd set it in the East, the West, and not connect it to New Vegas, or try to make a new city or new area. Now, interestingly, there was a lot of talk of communism as being a red herring in the flashbacks, and actors being accused of being communist, and anybody who is anti-vault tech being accused of being communist. But there was really no real mention of China, and which they play certainly some small role there in the Fallout games, as being at direct war, resource fighting for uranium. The cars don't look right. They used a bunch of classic cars that are real world cars instead of classic cars that have nuclear mini nuke elements to them. You never shoot a car and have it blow up and have radiation do anything there. You don't get a mini nuke launcher. You do see a lot of weapons used, particularly in the first couple episodes, where people are grabbing forks and things like that. But it all kind of plays to nothing. It does feel like there weirdly is no audience for this Fallout series that is the perfect audience. I think there's a lot of people that can enjoy it, but it is just very questionable as far as, if you've played the Fallout game, do you want to watch a TV series that is a worse version of being able to control the Fallout character yourself and play a Fallout game, versus if you have never played a Fallout game and have no idea what it is, then you see somebody stab somebody with a fork and you go, well, what was that? Why was there a fork being used there? And then, like, why was a shovel being used before? It's like, why are there so many improvised weapons in the first couple episodes? Inherently, that's probably not the question that will be asked, is if you have no idea what a ghoul is, then you're going to look at the series and go, why is this zombie missing a nose? Why are they calling him a ghoul instead of a zombie? Why is this main protagonist zombie doing drugs? Why is there so many drug references in the game, in the TV series? Like, there's just going to be a lot of extra stuff, and it's just going to feel too busy. It's going to feel too much like a video game in a lot of ways, but I think one of the major ways is that it's going to feel like there's just too many pickup items on screen. There's too many interactable elements. There's too many enemies, too many characters, too much jumping around in general as far as the cinematography, and that's not from the game. So from somebody who has played Fallout 3 twice, what bothers me is the jumping around between three main protagonists. And I think a lot of people who watch TV these days, particularly people who are still watching TV instead of streamers, aren't going to really appreciate jumping around like that as much. I almost wonder if it would have made more sense to have each episode be more dedicated to one character in that one character's story, and then them all coming together at the very end. You don't, in the video game, jump around. So that feels weird that the story jumps around like that. And in Fallout 3, you don't really do the Brotherhood of Steel stuff until it's time to do the Brotherhood of Steel stuff. And that's just it. And that's your main protagonist character you've been playing with for hours becomes a member of the Brotherhood of Steel. It's not that you jump into another character and start playing. That's something. I'll say you don't ever see a super mutant. I don't think super mutants are supposed to be around at that time or on the West Coast. Anyways, you do see some kind of salamander creature that I'm not familiar with. You don't see murlocs from Fallout 3, so there's several characters that could be introduced in the next season. And they definitely left it on a cliffhanger, so there will be a next season, or there needs to be a next season for it to really work and make sense. But overall, I would say, just to wrap up here, since I'm rambling, worth watching. I would say once, take your time with it, maybe ingest it a little bit slower and not marathon it, and you could think over it over the course of several weeks. I'm not sure if there's quite enough there to just watch one week. A lot of the locations that they don't show, they try to make up for by having these silhouetted in-credit sequences, and it really highlights how small the sets are and enclosed the areas are compared to what they should be. Yeah, I would say take it slow, watch it once. Don't think that there really is a high priority of seeing it early. There is, as far as I can tell, nothing in there that would be guaranteed to be in a new Fallout game, or that would spoil a new Fallout game. Oh, yeah. I don't have my things here. I'm gonna do something risky here and see if we can... No, let's not do that. I don't have my desktop things open. I'll just manually open them myself. That's the easiest way to fix that. I closed them in the last stream, and they automatically reopen if I change the settings, but I didn't change any settings. So yeah, I guess that's about as much as I've done. Is I marathoned last night all of the Fallout TV series, and I've started to test some games. I still need to do some testing on my Entomber script, and I've really not started working on the script for the Steam Deck to move the keyboard windows around, which that would be the next project. I wanted to finish one, and I'm losing momentum on finishing one. It is frankly increasingly disturbing on just how much I am not really getting into finishing up projects. Even knowing that if I take too long on a project, I'll probably end up abandoning it and thus trying to finish things quicker. I'm still not getting things done. Let's see if that's good enough for today. This dual triangle, by the way. Fusion, Synchro, XYZ. This looks new. In this event, participants will join one of 3 groups, each with different forbidden limited lists. Don't hesitate to join. You can even use a loner deck. So the question, I guess, would be, you would join a group, and then in joining that group, you're pledging your loyalty to that group to win this card protector, and then they want to see who is just going to win more often around this. People who are playing Synchro summons, Fusion summons, or XYZ summons. Now, inherently, I can already tell you who's going to win. It's going to be XYZ summons, because XYZ is the newest deck. And if I was to come over here and copy this The only thing I couldn't do would be have all these link effect characters, which would hurt my deck a little bit. But yeah. And if we would come over here and try and synchro summon and do the same thing, then it's going to stop me from using any of my extra cards, because all of these are synchro summons. So that would be a problem. Even more than playing that. And then if I was to come over here and join Fusion Summon, all of these would be banned also. So we have a prohibited XYZ deck here. It would get rid of Zeus, that, and that, and that, and not get rid of anything else. But I don't know if I can really win with something like that either. There's no suggested cards button here, so all we could try and do is just like increase cards that we do have, I guess. But inherently, you probably would want to get rid of something like this. So probably would make more sense to just take a new deck and play something different and more interesting. And the event hasn't even started yet, so yeah. One of my concerns on looking at Steam Deck games is just save games transferring over. So far from what I've observed, it seems to me like they always do transfer over just fine, but I definitely was concerned that I might enter a game and the save file would just be completely brand new. And then start it all over again. And with the family sharing save files and save games, there are also going to be a big issue. Let's play one more game. Here's an example of one of the side characters in Fallout 4 that plays some role, but he also is just he really is just yet another extra character that it seems unnecessary. This is interesting. Epic Games Store is promoting Back 4 Blood and World War Z. I do feel like there's going to be some small percentage of players a small percentage of people that see bits of the Fallout TV series and are just going to think of it as a Walking Dead ripoff. And I definitely feel like ghouls show up a little often in the beginning of the game to make it feel like it is much more of a Walking Dead ripoff than what you would expect. You would expect that there would be rad roaches showing up more often, or just other humans showing up more often. The two-headed cows never show up in the TV series, which is kind of interesting. There's a lot of promotion going on, certainly from Amazon, although I'm not sure how much of that promotion is really being targeted to people who wouldn't have already kind of known about it. So yeah, I don't think you're seeing Fallout commercials happening on like Facebook for old baby boomers or things like that, or on regular TV. You're seeing a lot of promotion, I think, from probably on Twitch and YouTube and Twitter and things like that. Which, interesting, because there's competition there. Certainly, where they're asking you to move your attention to a completely different platform. There was that slight non-controversy of one image of showing the backside of this female protagonist, and then somebody animating it to have much more of a tight latex, big booty appearance. I don't think this actress actually has a booty. I did look in like one scene, and yeah, she's not in any ways sexualized visually, but there is a bigger problem somewhat around that, in that I feel like she seems to be very much like a lot of other female actresses, just unwilling to really get dirty or ugly, or pull even an ugly face. She's always, a lot of female actresses, I won't say her, I'm not 100% sure, but it seems that a lot of female actresses are just not willing to face act or emote because they want every single angle to be potentially a good angle, and it just never really changes from that. She gets a little bit bloody, but it's always still perfect makeup. There's a point where her finger starts to look a little dirty, and that's it. Like, one pointer finger is dirty for reasons I won't spoil, but it's just like perfect hair, perfect makeup, and it just doesn't feel like that's accurate. And it feels like they've got the ghoul character trying to compensate for that, but even the ghoul character is kind of perfect ghoul makeup. So, like, for what a ghoul looks like, the ghoul character looks rather good. He compared to even other ghouls in the series, who look much more like decaying, dying zombies. The main ghoul protagonist looks like somebody that's got a skin cap on and is just bald and maybe a little bit burnt, whereas every other ghoul has like decaying, rotten black flesh. This is also probably a good example of some of the best set designs you'll see in Fallout, is that you'll have a small hallway that's been designed fairly well, and that's about it. It'll always just be a small hallway, small section, establishing shots, and then it's just never any bigger than that. And that makes sense in the vaults. It doesn't make a lot of sense in most of the other locations. You don't run into a lot of locations anyways, There's like one location called Shady Sands that they start talking about in the midway point of the series, of the TV series, and that's it. Whereas there's roughly like feels like 100 plus locations. Sometimes they're fairly small locations. Most of the time they're medium locations. Inherently, I guess, in the video game aspects, you'll find a door in the overworld, and that door will go into an inside location, and there would be a maze, and you'd wander around that maze fighting people. There's absolutely none of that, and that loses a lot of the Fallout feel, certainly, is that there just aren't really dungeons happening. Of course, that would add hours and hours to a TV show and just not really do much. It would be an interesting experiment, certainly, to have an entire season where you're just in a fairly large dungeon section. But almost anybody would be fairly uncertain about doing that, and would prefer, I imagine, for you to at most have one episode where you're in a dungeon section. Hey, we made it up to Platinum Tier. Do we have the missions done? Nope. Normal summon 2 monsters, and I'm getting quick disconnects, and I appreciate quick disconnects, but I'd like to be able to summon things first. Yeah, and apologies, I guess, today if you don't give a darn about the Fallout TV series. It's still very much as a case where there's not a single video game to movie, video game to TV thing that needs to be watched. It is all just superficial and often tries to be a replacement for what the video game is, and always fails on that aspect. It'll be interesting to see if there's a significant contrast you could make to, say, the Borderlands movie, because that is a fairly decent comparison of two games that are being done in very different ways. Fallout getting 8 episodes to tell its first season of a story, where Borderlands is going to be at most a 2-hour movie or something around that to tell the events of a story, which you would assume that means Borderlands is going to skip over any kind of side quest type feeling and just be on a main quest, and it's going to probably struggle to even be comedic, which will be a part of its downfall if it fails to be comedic. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Of course, the Borderlands movie, unless it comes to a streaming service that I could watch, I probably won't watch the Borderlands movie for months, if not years. Whereas it's way more convenient to just have Amazon Prime and watch the Fallout TV series. Definitely not going to the theaters to watch the Borderlands movie. See how this goes. I guess one of the issues here is that if I need to normal summon something, it would take me 2 or 3 turns to normal summon 2 or 3 things. And in many cases, that's just not what you want to do. So let's go on to the big news. Apparently Roblox has changed its marketplace policy, letting more users create and upload and sell avatar items. This is from Video Games Chronicle. Users no longer have to apply to join the platform's user-generated content program. I assume is what UGC stands for. So yeah, they are trying to monetize / rip off kids who are spending time thinking they can actually make Robux. Robux, which by the way, they have already been chastised publicly by people for the fact that these kids, or whoever, let's say it's whoever, create things and can upload them and sell them, but they can only get Robux and they can't cash out at any point. Which, yeah, that was a thing certainly in the old days of arcades that felt somewhat irksome in arcades, is that there was, well, there was a bigger gambling political debate happening, and that's why the tokens, that's why they would say tokens in arcades had no cash value. That the end effect for the actual kids in arcades, back when I was a kid in an arcade, was that you would be paying real world money for worthless tokens, and very rarely were you ever getting a situation where you were gaining tokens. But you also very frequently would have to leave, and then your tokens couldn't be used, at least for that day. In a lot of cases, as I got older and arcades started to die out, I would buy tokens for like one arcade and have extras that I would just have to give away to random people as I'm walking out the door. And at the last arcade I went to was one where they had the tokens on credit cards effectively, and the credit card, I just gave the credit card away, which, yeah, they, I guess, have just gotten even worse these days about that, because now it is just like you have these plastic credit cards that have currencies on them that you can't cash out. Yep. And yes, I get the whole idea. We don't want to encourage kids to gamble, but there's still a lot of those games that feel very gambly anyways. You're just encouraging them to gamble for stuffed dolls with crane games, or gamble for candy and things like that. So yeah, I don't think the issues that were real legitimate issues ever got addressed there, and in the long run it just let arcades rip off kids. Arcades for kids in particular are kind of a great example of things that should be like public playgrounds for kids. They should have been the evolution of that, in the sense that the city would take taxes and then they would have been running, they should just be running an arcade somewhere. It is kind of crazy that it never happened, but not surprising either. It would make a lot of sense right now that libraries, public libraries, could evolve to just have an arcade next door, where the kids can play and all the games are on free play, and the kids are not wandering the streets, or playing in the streets, or forming gangs, whatever reason or excuse you're making to keep kids entertained and busy. You really don't need an excuse. You don't need an excuse for a playground and things like that. But yeah, that really hasn't happened. I imagine, I haven't been in a library in a long time, so I imagine there probably has been some evolution of libraries. And back when I was a kid, there was a couple of computers that kids could play video games on Apple II style computers. But yeah, that was pretty much it. Let's see, what can we do? Need to normal summon something, not actually special summon something. I was thinking about winning instead of thinking about getting a daily quest done. The next big news here from GameDeveloper.com, Skybound Entertainment, which I believe is the parent company that also owns The Walking Dead licenses now, has launched a crowdfunding campaign for a AAA Invincible game. A couple problems I would say here. First of all, I don't think you can be that ambitious and say we want to make a AAA game, but we need public crowdfunding for it. I don't think you can start that high. Secondly, just kind of question what is an Invincible game going to be, because Invincible is true to his name. He's invincible, so as far as I can tell, physically at least, very much not so mentally and emotionally, and that is kind of the point of the story. But when you translate that into video games, wow, I actually leveled up. It's only taken 2.5 years to level up again. Feels like it really hasn't been that long. So yeah, if you play as Invincible, you're gonna beat up a bunch of people and it's just not gonna really matter. Well, mark this day to see how long it takes to get to level 36. It's gonna be a long time. We still didn't get that last normal summon. Whatever, we'll leave it. Yeah, it pretty much, I think, would just have to be a fighting game. And a fighting game where Invincible himself as a character is either not playable or he is weakened in some way. Because you've got to bring Invincible down to the level of the enemies and the other characters in the series. Otherwise, I don't think it's going to be a AAA game at all, because it would then just be like the Adam Eve game, which was basically just a visual novel, which is more likely what they're actually going to make, is that there will be more a Walking Dead style talking and adventure and decision making game, which that would be in line with the Invincible TV series, which I assume is in line with the comic book series. But yeah, I just don't think that there is a reality here where they're really going to make a AAA game that feels like a AAA game starring Invincible. It could be in the Invincible universe and not starring Invincible. Maybe that's the case. They're seeking a minimum of $50,000, which was way too low for a AAA game, and it's just seemingly like on the Republic crowdfunding website. I've never heard of this one. This is probably the minimum is designed so that they get whatever money is given, and then they're shooting the moon with a maximum of $5 million. It's already secured $440,000, which definitely can make a game, but I don't think is quite enough to make a AAA game. Says the game will be developed under the direction of a new in-house 30-person studio made up of veterans from Activision, Amazon Games, which is not really a credit. Worth mentioning, Blizzard Entertainment and EA. I would like to see a pitch, certainly, here of what the game actually is going to be, because they're very noticeably not saying what kind of game it is other than it's going to be AAA. So their first thought is not what kind of genre is it going to be. Is it going to be a fighting game? Is it going to be a narrative storytelling game? Is it going to be an adventure game? Their first thought is we want this to be in the AAA concept, which means it's just going to be big budget in the hopes of making as much money and profit as possible. Which, yeah, if you had real care about the project, you should be talking about what kind of game it is and what the goals are of the form of entertainment it's going to have, not how much money you're hoping to make from it. As gamers, we shouldn't even know what the phrase AAA means, because it shouldn't matter at all. We should be reviewing games not based on their budget or whether they're indie or have a publisher behind them. We should be reviewing games on whether they're fun and worth the money. That's all that should matter to us. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle says Nintendo says they won't be attending Gamescom 2024. Nintendo is expected to launch its next-gen console in early 2025. So it is, I suppose, more of a hint there, or you can certainly take something from nothing there to imply that they're just going silent because they are trying to save up all the announcements they can possibly save up. I do kind of wonder. I mean, one assumes that the next Nintendo console is going to be backward compatible. It would be kind of crazy if it wasn't, but I kind of wonder if it isn't perhaps a case that they have a lot to announce when the next console comes out, since it's being delayed. One is assuming because there was a part shortage, and otherwise it would have been released this Christmas season. I wonder if that delay is already on their schedule, showing them that there are several games that are going to be system sellers coming out with the launch of the new console. And that's why we see older games getting rushed out, like Paper Mario and things like that. Things that it definitely feels like there could have been a smoother release schedule for the Switch over its lifetime, where you could have had Paper Mario come out a year or two ago and fill in the gap at that point. But yeah, Gamescom overall does feel like it is growing in importance, as everything feels like it's growing in importance due to E3 being no more. And I really don't want to hear next year any talk from the ESA saying that they're going to bring E3 back, or that there are plans to bring E3 back, or do something different that is just E3 again, because they've been given too many opportunities and failed too many times at this point. They probably do need to do something, but they need to do something that is way different in a lot of ways, I feel like the ESA should probably just be a video production team, and have a video production team to publish and then put out press releases and announcements. But then they should produce the videos and just hand it back to Nintendo to do a Nintendo Direct, or back to Microsoft to do a Microsoft Direct, things like that. That's where they might be good. And that reminds me, one of the things that feels very weird about Embracer Group is, and Embracer's failure at this point, we can only really call it a failure, does feel like they made this giant company thinking that they would have publishers and publishing teams and advertisement teams, and that they'd be able to promote games that they make really well. And I question if that's really the case. I think they may very well have failed to hire the right people, or not even thought to hire people in the first place to have an internal publishing division and advertisement division to make sure that a company as big as Embracer was making itself actually had the right people, or anybody in charge of doing the things that they needed to get done. Or they are hiring the wrong people. Darksiders 3, for instance, feels like a game that they probably could have advertised a little bit better, although it wasn't that great of a game in the first place. And there's so few other games that Embracer Group has actually released. The SpongeBob games could have probably been advertised a little bit better too. Gearbox. Let's see. What Gearbox wanted to say: thank you for participating in Borderlands Science, the largest citizen science project of all time. Check out the latest results published by Nature Biotechnology. So this is some kind of folding at home type concept, I think, which is a interesting thought, but I also suspect that this might be something that gets shut down now that Take-Two is in charge. Look at how giant and ridiculous that is as far as a consent thing. So improving phylogeny with citizen science, be it within a mass market video game. So this is like a full-on scientific paper. Look at all these different hyperlinks and references here. But yeah. Apparently there was this Borderlands science gameplay. I vaguely recall reporting on this at some point. They definitely weren't promoting it much, though. It's not like there was a weekly post of updates or reminders of people doing this, and it really does feel like you're helping science by helping some person get a paper published, some professor or somebody going for their PhD. It is questionable whether the actual science that's being shown here leads to anything helpful, whereas the general hope and thought would be that if you were helping with things, you would be helping either some kind of chemistry or physics or energy, health, things that people are in general very enthusiastic about. And I can't help but think that there's a high danger here of people running their computers 24/7, using up electricity, most of which in the United States would be fossil fuel based burning of coal to create and hurting society in a longer run, because you're just destroying the environment, running your computer, running a mostly otherwise pointless science experiment. Like, what's the point of curing cancer if we destroy the planet in the process? That there just isn't a point at that point. So there's a level of efficiency that needs to be considered, and by pushing it off to people who think they're helping, you can create unintended consequences, or possibly very intended consequences. For instance, the push to be more pro-recycling and recycle more things in the homes of individuals is literally connected to whisper campaigns and propaganda campaigns from big oil. They are trying to get people to think that they're saving the world by recycling one piece of plastic, while big oil is dumping hundreds of tons of plastic into the ocean without anybody paying attention and looking at that. Meanwhile, even the recycling aspects themselves have become very scammy, because, and probably always were, because their recycling is just getting enforced by city regulations, and then the things that are supposed to be recycled are just getting shipped to China, and then China is pretending like they're recycling it, but they're probably dumping it in the ocean too. If we really wanted to save the world from plastic, the solution is actually to reduce, not recycle. And that's why it goes reduce, reuse, recycle. Like, reduce is the number one goal. Reuse is the second goal, so it doesn't end up in the trash. And then recycle only the last few things that can't be either reduced or recycled. And inherently, if you had a time machine, going back and making plastic illegal would be a really good move if you had a time machine and enough power to go back and make plastic illegal. Because we now know that microplastics are everywhere and causing illness, and we're probably going to find out that microplastics are the sources of many, many cancers and many, many diseases. So, yeah, if we just had always lived in a world where plastic didn't exist, then we would have probably been in a better situation in the long run. In similar ways that if we had lived in a world where cars never existed, or the engine was never invented, we would be better in the long run. We would be inconvenienced in the short run for sure, but better in the long run. Anyways, this is not video game related at this point, so let's move forward. The game content warning says it has sold 100, nope, let's read this correctly. 1 million copies following the launch giveaway, which I suppose, if these numbers are correct, then that is the first real metric to pay attention to. It seems to me like it probably is correct that they have sold 1 million copies, but they gave away 6.2 million free downloads. So 6 out of every 7 people who own content warning and could be playing it are playing it for free. And that's an interesting thought, certainly, is if that's how if that would work as a style for launching a business, to launch a game for the first day as a free-to-play game and then charge everybody who's late to the party. It wouldn't work for me. I wouldn't have played Memento Mori long enough. Even if you gave me like a couple hours of free demos, I wouldn't even bother to play the demo if I knew I was eventually going to have to pay money for it. And I would feel certainly like I am being cheated if 6 out of every 7 players got the game for free, and then I'm being asked to pay for it. But I will keep my eyes open and ears open to see if this concept really works or not. Apparently, Final Fantasy Rebirth is underperforming sales-wise, an analyst is claiming. This is from Video Games Chronicles. The game is reportedly sold about half of what Remake did in the same time frame. I don't even know if that's a problem, though. And this might very well be a case of analysts analyzing things outside of perspective from a video game, because yeah, if only a third of your average gamers make it to the credits of one game, then the sequel selling only about half of what its original player base sold is not that unsurprising. I mean, it seems like that could be very much the case, and that may very much still be a reasonable number of sales. In the long run, if you make a trilogy, the second game will eventually start selling too, and it will plateau at about the same numbers as the first game, a little less. And then the third game will quote-unquote underperform until eventually that too will plateau with about the same sales as the second game, maybe a little less. Which that also highlights why the idea of making trilogies doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, trilogies for video games in particular don't make as much sense because video games can be any length in the first place. Trilogies for movies made sense because movies were somewhat limited in their length. You couldn't make a 6-hour movie and have people sit through it. I'm not particularly concerned. We will very possibly have Square Enix come out and say the same thing, but I would like to wait and see if Square Enix themselves says they feel like Final Fantasy Rebirth is underperforming. A former Blizzard boss suggests players should be able to tip devs after finishing a game. This is the former Blizzard president said most will dislike the idea. This is Mike Ybarra saying this. I don't think anybody for a second should think that tipping culture is a smart idea in video games or anywhere. And his examples here of like Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, Red Dead Redemption, Baldur's Gate 2, Elden Ring, that made him consider the tipping model. Have I played any of these games? No. Do I think I would want to tip anybody extra $10, which is a lot of money, $10 or $20? There are people that like to just tip people, and then there are a lot of idiots that will tip extra just out of social pressure or bad math skills. But yeah, I don't think at the end of any of games, like my favorite games, Portal 1, Portal 2, I wouldn't tip at the end of that. I would think, oh, that was a great game. I've gotten my money's worth. I've maybe even gotten more than my money's worth. Why would I want to tip somebody? And who the heck would that tip go to? Let's get down to the core of this dumb idea, which is a dumb idea, and I think it probably highlights perhaps where Blizzard and Mike Ybarra in particular are just disconnected from what an average person is and disconnected from gaming in the way gamers think. Gamers potentially, I would assume, like to game the systems. What's the best way to game the system in tipping? It's to not tip. Or tip very little, or tip very strategically, at the very least. None of that would be the case in this. But yeah, there's a massive problem of people not getting credited in video games. All of a sudden you have a tipping situation and people are getting uncredited, or money is coming in that potentially should be going to employees that no longer work for the company. Yeah, those employees aren't going to see tips. this tipping would be 100%. Let's give the CEO, Mike Ybarra, more money. Let's give the board more money. Let's give more money to a corporate entity that may not in any way be made up of the same people who actually made the game. Yeah, this is a really dumb idea. And thank goodness that most people are wise enough that they will not tip unless they're seeing somebody face to face, which does also create more problems and just highlight the problems with the idea of tipping in the first place, which is people really should just say, I'm not tipping because I don't bribe people. Like it's just like my moral decision is I don't bribe people. I expect them to be paid by their employers to do a good job. I expect the employers to pay them decently, hopefully a living wage, but I'm not going to bribe somebody at the end of their service to do something next time better. But yeah, even when you tip a waiter or waitstaff, you have no idea what's going on in the back as far as the chefs and the dishwashers and the management. And so those people may be doing a great job for you and you just won't see it because it's not in front of your face, or they may be doing a terrible job for you and you may not see it. And then you may tip people who are undeserved. And yeah, certainly I think most people could go on a rant about tipping and hating tipping, and Mike Ybarra is totally disconnected, which thank goodness he's a former Blizzard president. And I guess this is news worth reporting because bad ideas probably should be shouted down. And anytime you say a phrase like most will dislike this idea, well then you're a bad salesman. You know your idea is bad and you're just balkanizing yourself against criticism, just setting your feet in the ground and going, yeah, I know most of these losers are not going to agree with my idea, but my idea is still good enough to say in public, and I've thought it through and it's right still. Which, if your idea was good, you should be a good enough salesman to pitch it, or you should stay silent on the idea until you can find one trusted person to help you explain it and pitch it overall. People inherently, if they are explained and pitched and sold the idea, will accept good ideas. I hope that is true, at least. But yeah. If we were going to add tipping culture to anything, let's just make a list of things that probably should be tipped as far as tipping culture. I could see teachers being tipped. Yeah, but inherently, isn't that just bribing your teacher? Teachers used to get apples, or at least that's the old cliche. I could see a lot of like janitorial people and such that could be tipped. Like that inherently there's a lot lesser paid people, lower social class, lower income people, that if anybody should be getting tipped, I'm not sure anybody should, would come up in my mind well before fairly high paid, fairly low labor as far as physical work employees, which is video game designers and the management in particular of video game designers. I would imagine if any union company, video game company, if the management suggested the idea of tipping, the union would say absolutely not. We're not going down that route. Not one bit. Because inherently the tipping would just be used as a way of maintaining a lack of raises and livable wages coming out of the pockets of the profits of a video game. And if you really wanted to show your appreciation to video games, you would talk about it, you would promote it, you would thank the creators, the actual people who worked on it. There's nothing, I guess, stopping a video game developer from having a Patreon or a coffee type link where you could tip them directly. And that is definitely the case if you were going to do it that way. But gamers are kind of poor. Like, we tend to spend all of our money on Steam summer sales and buy games like that. We don't tend to have extra money just to throw around that we wouldn't prefer to buy more games with. Speaking of Steam sales, when the summer sale goes on, I think I'm going to probably try and bump up the number of games I own that are already on my wish list that are Steam Deck compatible. I'm gonna try to have a real focus there. I already have like 1,400 games that are compatible or somewhat compatible with the Steam Deck, but if I could find ones that are really verified to run well, that would be my next thought, is to bump that up. But also, I'm still not really planning on spending a lot of time playing games, new games on the Steam Deck that I haven't covered for my channel. So it'll be somewhat of a balance between buying new games for video content and older games that I just want on my Steam Deck that I'm not going to make video content on. If they can't be the same thing, they may very well be the same games. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Lawbreakers 2.0 fan project makes Cliff Bleszinski's quote dead first-person shooter playable again after 6 years, which I guess good for fans there. Video Games Chronicle says the UK games market grew 4.4% last year. Physical sales decline was better than expected, so it didn't decline as much as they thought it was going to. The IGDA retweeted the IGDA Jewish Developers SIG support group, or they have put out a formal report here from a roundtable on anti-Semitism experienced by their community. What's funny about this is that this roundtable was announced, I think, slightly before Israel and Gaza all happened. And so sentiment in the United States in particular, I think, has shifted quite a bit as far as how much people want to hear it or how much people want to believe it. And so before I even click the report here, yeah, it is all going to be in a different window now due to Israel and Gaza, and we'll try and make this as non-political as possible, but inherently when you're talking Jewish people, like the Jewish religion and the Jewish race is about as politicized as you can get, and has been for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I also am going to put out a marker here as far as a bet that what's going to be in this report is that they're going to talk about there being a lot of anti-Semitism in games, in the sense of some idiot somewhere over chat said something anti-Semitic. It will, I suspect, be less legitimate examples of some Jewish person tried to work in the games industry and they were legitimately harassed in whoever's opinion of legitimately your personal opinion, I guess, is what you'll have to take there. Inherently, I don't really see a lot of Jewish people working in the games industry. But let's look at the report and see what they say and not just wildly speculate. But I definitely want to say that there's two perspectives here that to look from. Is the player base actually people who are just playing games, and then there being a small percentage of them actually saying anti-Semitic things? Unlike like women, when they get on chat, a woman getting on chat sounds like a feminine voice. And in a lot of cases, a Jewish person getting on chat in a video game does not sound like anybody that would be immediately identified as being Jewish. Yeah, so there is a difference there. Immediately, as far as just how much you could be identified or you would out yourself as being Jewish versus a female who basically has to have a voice changer to be on chat, as far as the player base. And then I have no idea as far as what the experiences would be as far as employment. It is also worth pointing out that when you have a Jewish group, it maintains itself and exists to inherently by claiming that there's a need for it to exist, which inherently claims that the Jewish people need extra support and thus are being persecuted in some way. Because if Jewish people were being not persecuted in some way in the game industry, then there's no reason to have a separate IGDA, Jewish Game Developers Group. Alright, so really big words here. Commensurately, anti-Semitism has also risen across the games industry. Many Jewish game developers have been unable to speak up, and if they do, they are met with continued anti-Semitism. I guess we're not going to get any citations here. Anti-Semitism is dramatically increased around the world. Next year, I imagine they'll say the exact same thing. I imagine every year they say that. This is especially true online, where misinformation is shared and corrections are met with resistance without considering the effect that it has on Jews in the games industry. In this roundtable, we showed our experiences. Now, inherently, I'm going to just throw out, I don't think I have seen a major rise of anti-Semitism in the United States, but it is very much from very much conservative, right-wing, crazy people, even to that extreme, that believe like Jewish space lasers exist, and they legitimately talk about it. It's QAnon people. I don't think there's many, maybe more than 2 or 3 people like that in the game industry, though. The video game industry is very much left-wing, progressive, SJW woke people, so they would probably bend over backwards to defend the Jews. And so when you say a phrase like misinformation, I'm thinking Jewish space lasers nonsense, but it could be anything in general. Do we need an entire who are the Jews? No, I don't think we do. So let's go to the next page. What is with this? What is with this document presenter? This is weird. Okay, so this is really small, and none of this feels like this has anything to do with video games. Yeah, this feels very much like this is a case of somebody has written a news article or feels like this is just a college paper somebody wrote, and they've just added the phrase video game or games industry into it. And see, it's not until you get to page 6 of 9 that they're actually even talking about the game industry. So, I mean, in any case, if you're not getting to the meat of your paper until 2/3 of the way through, you've written a poor paper. Let's see. There's a link here, or it looks like a link, but it's not actually linking to anything. So they're talking about, they're saying somebody did not recognize Jews as a marginalized community in the video game world, which is an interesting thought. Because it's almost a snake eating its tail. Because initially, on the first paths of it, you would think maybe, yeah, when you're trying to have a safe space, or when the SJWs in the video game community are trying to have a safe space for black people or women, which is what they're usually most focused on, they would say, well, that there really isn't any Jews in the game industry or in this specific video game company, so, or if there are Jews, that they don't feel like they're being marginalized. Yeah, I could see that being a problem. I'm willing to buy the gist here that the SJWs might be so obsessed about women and blacks and Mexicans that they would overlook Jews. Inherently, this is a thing that definitely happens because Jews look like white men most of the time, and they are only being marginalized a lot of times because, well, that's the thing, is I'm not sure they are. I mean, it's just like there's not enough examples to sample there. Yeah, I don't know. There's arguments on both sides. Like, when you go to apply for a job and you're black or you're a woman, they see that you're black and a woman, and there's a real way where you can be marginalized and not hired. If you go to apply for a job and you're Jewish, like, they can't see that you're Jewish in most cases. Like, inherently, a lot of people in the United States see Jews as exclusively the religion and the culture and the behaviors, things that are very much changeable if they so chose, whereas women have to transition to men and still aren't considered true men by a lot of people, and black people can't transition to being white. There's just not that much anti-Semitism in the United States, I think, as is around the world, where you see really pure things, like where you see signs that say no Jews allowed, where you have Jews often kicked off their lands and such. As far as this next example, it seems like somebody somewhere made a joke about Jews being greedy. Jokes like that have been around, and frankly, their community plays into that. Jewish comedians make those jokes, and there are definitely some unrealistic demands that are made by people of all cultures, and when they happen to be Jewish, then that propagates the stereotype too. In the same way that the stereotype of all black people being gangsters gets propagated when you have gangster rappers propagating that too. And then they're saying somebody somewhere said that they killed their savior Jesus, which, I mean, according to the Bible, is not inaccurate, but also inherently divinely ordained and planned. So it would be a good thing, not a bad thing, that you don't get the resurrection, and you don't get being saved in general as a Christian unless Jesus was crucified. But yeah, you're talking two idiots saying two things here, and one person making a decision. And like their action to this has nothing to do with video games. Like deeds being prohibited, Jewish occupancy in Gentile suburbs in cities like Baltimore. This probably was done 60, 70, 100 years ago, not anytime recently. So they're complaining about first the Holocaust and other things that are not happening in recent history. And so there's nothing really to address as far as buried past. And let's see, are we having any other examples here? Let's see. Multiple Jewish game developers cited October 7th as a catalyst for hiding their ethnicity in workplace due to the derision of their co-workers, claiming a microaggression. Jewish Israeli game developers expressed fear at the idea of moving out of Israel for academic or career opportunities due to global anti-Semitism. Well, I mean, you can't really blame somebody else because you're personally afraid of moving somewhere. AAA studio team had team events for different history months, but refused to do an event for the Jewish American Heritage Month because it was religious, despite holding events for Christian holidays of Christmas and Easter. They make a good point on this one. I can fully agree with this one being wrong. That yeah, and inherently, if you're going to have events for Christmas and Easter, you should have events for everything else that anybody else wants to have. Yeah, I don't see any way you can defend that one. And that highlights a problem certainly here, is that you'll have people who want to have different history months, and then if you have events for different history months, you end up having to support everything. Otherwise, you are being hypocritical. An individual told a Jewish Israeli co-worker they should remove their experience with the Israeli Defense Force from their LinkedIn profile due to their attitudes of others. Which, okay, that sounds like they were given legitimate advice of whether they want to take it or not, and now they're putting this into a 9-page long complaint document. Let's see. So yeah, and then this last page doesn't have any complaints. Okay, well, let's go through this, and I'm surprised that they didn't bother to make a long list of complaints. Like, inevitably, there is almost certainly some idiots on chat, as far as gamers in the gaming community, who have said some anti-Semitic things, definitely, as we get that all the time. But when you have 3 pages of individual complaints here, that is nothing. Like, unless you're making a claim that for some other reason that you cannot prove or express, Jewish people are not being allowed to work in the video game industry at all. This is a pathetically small amount of complaints for 1 year, and most of the complaints seem to be individualized, one thing he said, she said situations that would have just ideally been taken to HR and hoped that HR happened to it, or taken to individual like fair labor boards. The start here that anti-Semitism has drastically increased across the world, while true, I suspect, is a sharp contrast to the actual game industry. This is a case where somebody has written a very poor letter. Feels like a high school level report that, I mean, to the point where I'm not even sure if I fully believe it's the quotes are cited and true here. Because this really could just be a chat GPT made up story here. It is low hanging fruit. Somebody probably did say, "You killed my savior," but did it happen this year or last year or 10 years ago? Like, who knows? I question the validity of the truth of a lot of these statements just by the poorness of this report. Yeah. And inherently it gets down to the microaggressions problem overall. Is that when you are just complaining about microaggressions, you're complaining about things you'd just be better not complaining about, because you come off as a whiner. Like, it's just the truth of it. Let's fix the real aggressions, frankly. Like, let's throw the Jewish community a bone here. Before this group convened and when this roundtable summary, which, yeah, if this is the roundtable summary, that means they paid somebody or they had somebody write down what was talked on a roundtable, which very much is just going to be random people sitting around a round table talking. But in between this roundtable and this summary, the bone that we can throw the Jewish people is that there was a massive amount of anti-Semitism enacted against them, in that terrorists went into their country and kidnapped their citizens. Now, inherently, the government of Israel reacted to that in a very aggressive and violent way. More recently, there's been other people who have reacted to that reaction in a very aggressive and escalating of violence way. But yeah, when you are going into a country and you're just taking hostages of people, and the country is made up and literally a Jewish country, as Israel is, then you can slap that down as being anti-Semitic, as far as, or at least anti-Israelis, and that would be the bone to throw to them and say, hey, there's your anti-Semitism right there. When you have people in Turkey putting signs that say no Jews allowed in front of their shops, that is real anti-Semitism. When you have people spray painting on Jewish synagogues and trying to burn down Jewish synagogues, which have happened several times this year, that's the real anti-Semitism that you should be focused on. But when you get down to microaggressions and individual complaints from one idiot talking to another and just words being spoken, that's not big enough to make news. That's not important enough to be talking about. The real roundtable results here should be that we've seen a massive amount of anti-Semitism increase around the world, but thankfully the video game industry is not really doing that bad. In fact, they're doing fairly well. I think you would find 99.99% of every video game company and every video game developer more than happy to be an SJW and an ally to Jewish people. They'd love to see Jewish people work in the game industry and make more video games. There is a video game on Steam called the Shiva that I own, and I definitely wanted to cover that at some point. And there definitely have been points in the past where I've thought about covering it, and then I've thought, is this the right time to cover this, or is this the wrong time to cover it? In part that because it's Jewish, in part because it's about sitting Shiva for someone who's died. But yeah. I inherently don't like these action organizations. Not just Jewish ones, but just action organizations in general. Even the International Game Developers Association alone, the parent company, might be too much of an action organization. But I was interested, certainly, in seeing what they were going to say, or what they had said in the past. It is definitely better to promote things. I like this Hedy Lamarr post a lot more than it is to complain about things that don't feel like that's the issue. And so that's why I've been following him. I've been keeping an eye out for him. But yeah. Webinars. You can see there's a lot of focus here around this presentation and this round table. But yeah. Guess we'll have to leave it at that. But yeah. These kinds of organizations, once you establish yourself as we've got to always have a problem and an enemy and a dragon to fight, they see the world from that perspective. Yeah. And that's where they start to lose perspective on reality in a lot of cases. Back to more traditional video game news, since that was a long one. Fallout games. Yeah, and I imagine somebody will try in the chat to say something and interpret something that I didn't say one way or the other. Please don't. I'll put that warning there too. Otherwise, I'm just going to block you. There's a lot of people, certainly, that have a lot of propaganda drilled into their brain, and so they see the world from very different perspectives, or they see the world from their more narrow experiences. So yeah, a lot of what I was saying, I will just say, is my understanding and my experience of what's happening in the United States in video games. So perhaps if they had said, these are all things that happened in this one specific spot, if they could target the specific company in that, it would give more credibility to it. Because yeah, if you told me these kinds of things were happening in Saudi Arabia as you were building Saudi video games as a Jewish game developer, then yeah, I'd believe it for sure. But yeah, knowing the laws in the United States, knowing what kind of gamer, what kind of game how SJW game developers are in the United States, and seeing the lack of citations overall, that just feels like a very poor summary. Kind of thing you would have been better off just saying, we had a nice round table, but that's it. We don't need to repeat this, or we had some interesting ideas. They're offering absolutely no solutions or suggestions. There was some things at the end about know the rules of HR and know your local laws so you can sue people, but yeah, none of it really comes down to how could we change our interpretation or our behavior of the situation to fix the situation. It's just how could we try and force the other people to fix the situation or change their behavior. Moving on. Fallout games have seen the Steam player counts more than triple following the TV show's release. Fallout 76 has also broken its concurrent player count, which that may not be that high of a number, frankly. This might be where the real value of having a video game, the TV show, comes from, is that it might be a case where it will encourage people to go back and play your old games. Although I don't know if that's really going to make Microsoft any extra money, since I imagine most people that are going back to play a Fallout game already owned it. So biggest leap was in Fallout 4, so most people were playing the newest game, which was probably underplayed, and I don't know if anybody really is anywhere as happy with Fallout 4 as they were Fallout 3 or New Vegas. Fallout 76 is also new. New Vegas is getting the least of the bumps there, and if you'd watched the series all the way through, New Vegas really should be getting the highest bump. It's been reported that the Fallout TV series has been renewed for a second season. I definitely am hoping that they would kind of push the main actress to be more present and more ambitious in the second season. Otherwise, she's going to become an anchor to the series. And if you killed her off, I mean, you could probably kill her off and replace her pretty easily, but you may lose some of your audience there. Let's see, a Japanese Pokemon Scarlet and Violet hacker has been arrested for selling modified Pokemon. It's believed he may have made millions of yen over a 4-month period. I feel like it's probably wrong to have laws where people can be arrested for doing such a non-violent crime. Apparently modifying save files and distributing edited data is illegal in Japan. Yeah, and so if you wanted a 100% save file in Japan, if it had been modified to be a 100% save file instead of naturally achieved, that seems ridiculous that should be illegal. And this is since 2019. And the fact that they're actually prosecuting people from this is very much in that Asian style of they're going to have laws and they're actually going to use them. Not that the United States doesn't use some weird laws to throw people in jail too. Inherently, if you are making money from it, though, that's going to catch people's attention. What I hate about stories like this is that anytime anybody thinks of a way to make a new career or make any profit. It inherently is made illegal by stronger corporations, Nintendo, the Pokemon Company in this case. I'm sure being very happy that corporations overall got this law enacted in 2019. When, from a different perspective, you have somebody here that's just being enterprising and saying, hey, I found a way to sell something that people wanted to make people happy, and there's literally nobody being hurt in the deal at all in this case. I don't even think in this case that Scarlet and Violet players can really fight other players, so it's not like they're really even cheating and hurting the integrity of a player versus player experience, which, even if they were cheating and there was a player versus player experience, that should just be on the Pokemon Company to fix their games to catch modified Pokemon and ban them from being used in player versus player experiences. They're saying this is that the act is called the Unfair Competition Prevention Act, when literally it is creating unfair competition, not preventing unfair competition, because it is allowing companies like the Pokemon Company to stop somebody from being enterprising and modifying Pokemon for the people who want to cheat and get modified Pokemon. And that's a problem that we're increasingly having around the world, is that the internet in particular started off as this place where you had tons of websites, everybody can have their own website, there could be a ton of competition, and now the websites have been narrowed down to, you go to Google, YouTube, Amazon.com if you're going to buy something, and that's pretty much it, maybe Walmart.com. That the amount of competition for entertainment is way down. The amount of competition for where you'd even get an email account is way down. That you'd be kind of crazy to get even a Yahoo account versus a Gmail account these days. And certainly if you wanted to start a business on the internet, you would have a real hard time having anybody find that business. Like in the old days, if you were going to be enterprising, you would start your own website and you would try to get on like a web ring or get recommended by other blog sites type posts. Nowadays, if you were going to try and start a business, you're going to have to go through PayPal or Shopify or some other bigger corporation that is going to take a cut of your sales. It's not a one-to-one comparison to modifying Pokemon and selling them, but it's the similar idea. You have somebody here who found a way to make something of value to people, and then you have a giant corporation throwing them in jail for daring to try and make profit and be part of the capitalist society. Because capitalism, late-stage capitalism, is totally about having the corporations really control everything and run everything. And that's one thing about the Fallout TV series that they kind of explicitly say is that the United States, before the bombs fell, was in so much debt to Vault-Tec that Vault-Tec was really running the whole business, the whole country. And so it really was a corporatocracy at that point, even though they didn't make people aware of it. Let's see. What was I gonna talk about? I did see some reviews of Alone in the Dark, finally, and it seems like it's a decent enough game. But this was what I was talking about earlier as far as THQ Nordic just not having a good advertisement group or publishing group, in that they are having random people, streamers and celebrities, wander around dark places and being alone in the dark instead of properly advertising the Alone in the Dark. Like, game. I haven't seen commercials for it. I haven't seen ads for it. It just doesn't feel like they did a good job. They really haven't been doing a good job advertising Snow Day, even though Snow Day is not particularly being well received either. But it is definitely old school craziness to get PewDiePie wandering around and to promote Alone in the Dark instead of showing game footage and trying to get people interested in that. Now, I guess that's pretty much going to be the last time I mention Alone in the Dark until I get around to buying it and playing it, if I ever get around to buying it and playing it. Yeah. Doing old school countdowns, the day countdown to the release. But even in that, THQ Nordic is also promoting several other things so that they're not being consistent. Is Angry Joe being left alone in the dark? There's another streamer or celebrity or somebody. It's just like a real, here's PewDiePie. Yeah, just with the whole idea of Embracer Group, they did not hire the right people. And that almost certainly should have been day one. Is that you would have formed a publishing team or hired the right publishing team before you even thought about becoming Embracer Group. Is to say, hey, we're going to have our management publishing team ready to go to publish and promote every game made by each of our subsidiary. I would say Xbox probably has some room for improvement there also, in that their publishing isn't always consistent or isn't always that great, considering how much Microsoft and Xbox have acquired as far as video game companies. Here we have former Major Nelson, which I listened to one of the Xbox podcasts that's more recent, and yeah, they got a new guy on there that was way too saccharine sweet and positive for my taste. He's I don't know if I could really tolerate listening to that guy. I'm not sure if he's going to be a permanent guy or not, but they also don't really have too much to say. They never really did on the Xbox podcast. But the Twitter here is that Major Nelson, Larry Herb, is talking about a time apparently he was set on fire and jumped from a three-story building for Miss Explosion Man or Explosion Man. Seems to be soaked in an anti-burn gel from the looks of it. That's pure insanity, frankly, and probably a little ego that you would, as the guy at the time in charge of Xbox, allow somebody to set you on fire, and then also you're going to jump from a three-story building. That's insanity. That's something you go, no other CEO or middle manager in any other industry would take part in that. And inherently, the fact that you're using your Major Nelson gamer tag and that he made himself such a celebrity highlights just an ego there that probably shouldn't have been there, and probably would have been better. That energy, the energy to set yourself on fire and jump off a building, would have almost certainly been better placed and used if you to make better video game deals and things being released. Which, by the way, if you ever get the opportunity to set yourself on fire or jump off a building, I would recommend it. Don't do it. and that was for Explosion and a small indie game. I also wanted to point out he did this poll as far as what do people want to hear him talk about on the new podcast. And yeah, inherently when he put out that poll, I said if he doesn't have a passion about talking about anything, he shouldn't start a podcast in the first place. But looking at these things that he's shared, which seems like he skipped page 1 here, the vast majority of people seem to want him to do current game releases, and if this is somewhere around 650, then we have a fairly high number of people that responded. The vast majority of people wanted him to do interviews with game developers, which I think also highlights how a lot of this information is going to be fairly useless, because obviously people are just going to demand everything. It wasn't an and or situation. It wasn't an or situation. Did you want? It should have been phrased, would you prefer a current game release discussion, or would you prefer interviews with game developers? Not both. Which inherently, if Larry Herb did interview game developers, I don't know if he would bring anything to the table there. I'm not sure he even brings anything talking about current game releases. Now, you have a much more balanced personal tech option here, with far fewer people interested, phones, watches, etc. And that might be the one thing Larry Herb actually was passionate about. Interviews with game developers is at 525 or so. This was at 650. So you kind of have to compare those numbers. The highest number here is like 215 people, and it is very much 3 out of 5, so people aren't even really that enthusiastic about that. And then it skips from number 4 to number 10 here as far as science stuff, and some people are slightly interested in that, but it is 260. So it highlights in these 4 of what seem like 10 slides that they want Larry Herb to talk about video games and don't care what he has to say about anything else, which is the right response if anybody's going to do that at all. Again, though, he's seemingly looking for work and just bored. I don't know. I don't think we're ever going to get any proof of this, but I think Larry Herb was fired. Like, this does not feel like somebody who was ready to retire, had a plan, had something to keep themselves busy, nor does it feel like somebody who has got another job lined up or anything. I think it probably was a very cordial, nice management laying off, firing. It probably wasn't for cause or anything like that. We haven't heard any controversies, but it does seem like he was probably just let go because Xbox needed to go in a different direction and he wasn't getting the deals done. And then the last bit of big news before I'm going to take a little bit of a bathroom break is that Laka 5.0 has been released, which Laka is, I think, some kind of front end for retro arc. I haven't really investigated it too much. The images here look a little bit Photoshop-ish. See if we can figure out what Laka is. Open source game console. Laka is a lightweight Linux distribution that transforms a small computer into a full game retro gaming console. So it's like RetroArch, but not for the Raspberry Pi. It's for x86 CPUs, so it's going to have an emulation station like interface like this. This looks somewhat close to emulation station. This may just be RetroArch actually. And yes, it can be put on the Raspberry Pi. But I don't know why you would do Laka instead of RetroArch, except for the case here that Laka just got updated and RetroArch has not. For all I know, Laka is RetroArch, and they just changed their name. No, I don't think that's really the case. Looking at these release dates, I would have caught that had that been the case. So it's just a little competition. Of course, you're in that weird position at the moment where even with the Raspberry Pi 5, I can't really recommend buying a Raspberry Pi and doing RetroPie or Laka. It's just too weak of a device compared to just saving up your pennies and buying a Steam Deck, which is way more expensive. Anyways, I'm going to take a break. We'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Apologies for that. Apologies if I'm coughing in people's ears too. I occasionally, as we go through all the new games on Steam here, listen to Player One podcast, which I believe is a collection of people who worked in some of the PC gamer magazines or something like that in the past, and they have a gamer podcast, but mostly they just kind of like play games and talk about the past, and they really aren't talking about new games or saying anything that is particularly that thoughtful. But the most recent Player One podcast I listened to, somebody must have been sick and they must have not edited out all the sniffles they were doing, but it was just unbearable as a listen, because yeah, you're not going to just not going to have a good experience audio wise if somebody is just sniffling. This doesn't have anything to do with this game, but I did find out that Nutaku, not Nanuka, which is an adult Android video game or mobile video game storefront, is one of the increasing adult websites that is blocking the state of Texas from because of their most recent real ID collection laws for adult sites, porn sites, which that is video game related because they're selling adult video games. Now, arguably Nutaku adult video games aren't that great. Arguably there aren't that many great games anyways. Broken Roads is mostly negative. Interesting. So should I just toss it off the follow list at this point? You're saying the game is just boring. I'll give it more time, I guess. As far as mobile games, I am still playing Tinka Fuma, and it's still, as an adult game, is doing fairly well. And then the non-adult game Memento Mori has its 1.5 year anniversary, and they're celebrating that. And so they're doing an invite drive where people share their invite codes for rewards, and anybody that's playing gets like 3,000 gems, which is a decent amount, but not a huge amount of gems for a gacha game where you're going to spend gems like crazy. For instance, to do a proper 10 gem or 10 pull gym run at the higher levels that give you more rewards, you would need 5,000 gems. You could do 10 gem pulls at the lower reward tiers, but it's not really a good way to invest your gems. They only introduce like 1, maybe 2 characters each month on Memento Mori, but it's still, as a free-to-play player, kind of difficult to make sure you get all the characters. And I question if I won't eventually just give up on Memento Mori, because I will just feel like I'm falling so far behind as far as getting each of the characters. Plus, I'm falling behind by just having 2 accounts. It would make a lot of sense to abandon 1 account first before abandoning the game completely. One of the games that I clicked to install, and I guess I should really play it, is the Aperture Desk Job demo game that was designed specifically for the Steam Deck. That probably should be pre-installed for every account, because it is really just a tutorial. But I guess it's kind of nice that Valve isn't doing that. Here we have a Korean only visual novel. Because I could see a lot of people also being upset if every time they buy a Steam Deck or reinstall their Steam Deck. I'm not sure how you really would reinstall a Steam Deck in SteamOS. If things went really, really bad, you would probably struggle. You'd have to have a USB stick that you plug into it and install it from scratch there. But then it is also an immutable operating system where the file system is locked down unless you unlock it, so you have to go out of your way to break the operating system. I do hope that they make a newer version on the Steam Deck of SteamOS. There's definitely some major changes happening in just the past couple of weeks with Arch Linux, and if those all get updated and KDE Plasma 6 instead of Plasma 5 gets updated, it'll be some pretty major changes. But they also probably want to test it. There is definitely a thought here that Valve would just want to take it slower, and I don't think that's the right attitude, though. They want to take it slow enough so that they don't break things, but they also should need to update it to keep people excited and hyped around it. There is a real danger that the Steam Deck would just sit around with no updates, and then it would just get boring. You wouldn't have that growing audience. We have another Japanese only, this time, visual novel. I did find in FlatHub, in the Discover app, to install Flatpaks, which uses FlatHub as the repo, I'm pretty sure, that there is a closed caption app for desktop mode that looks like it would just work for everything. There is certainly a question about how many times on a Linux desktop somebody would be talking that you would need just a closed caption app to pop up and translate it for you. It would make a lot more sense to have that kind of application work off the microphone, and maybe it can. I haven't played with it yet, but it's certainly an interesting idea to just have a device that would automatically, locally, on its own computer processing power, closed caption the world around you. Unfortunately, I don't believe it has live translate. There definitely are a lot of things that Google has done with their money and support behind it that were good ideas and then pretty much ignored by Google. And now it is open source needing to recreate some same functionality in an open source way, which arguably, had they just open sourced their software in the first place, would have been better for everybody in the long run. I'll give this a chance. I was trying to start early today, but I don't know if I'm really accomplishing that too much. Should I really make a YouTube short around this? I'm being extremely generous on that one. I've seen a game like this, so I assume this is the same concept, just being ripped off, where you drag words together and the words use a large language module type system to create new words. Screenshot wise, this is incredibly uninteresting to look at. Yep. Like, we've seen alchemy style games before, and what I've always wanted with those is they've had icons and they've had a fairly limited set of things you can create, and ideally it would have some goals and some breadcrumbs to show you how to get from point A to point B. Sisyphus pushing up different kinds of balls up a hill. It's kind of an interesting comic concept, but the actual game itself just looks like an asset flip to me. Does this support English? It says it does. Give that a chance. I'll give that a chance also. Is this an adult game? Yes, it is. Once again, we have an adult game outside of the adult section. I need to go and mark private all the adult games on my account. In the long run, that'll just be easier. But that'll take some extra time. Yeah, this whack-a-mole game in particular just makes the whole game feel like it isn't an adult game. Most of these screenshots outside of the cleavage could just be a lewd visual novel, but it seems to me like it's actually got adult content in it. And then we still got stuff that's fairly easily dismissible. Puzzle adventure game. Here you have a visual novel of a different art style. We'll give that a chance. I am still struggling to upload and schedule all the YouTube shorts, and that will always be a struggle. That's about all my computer is doing outside of streaming. Here we have Tower of Babel. I've seen several mentions of Tower of Babel recently, which probably means that the Tower of Babel gets referenced fairly often, and then I'm just not paying attention. Because once you start paying attention to something, you start seeing it everywhere. Ramen oil simulator, that's weird. I'm gonna give this a chance, even though it's probably nothing. One of the other things about the Fallout TV series, I guess is worth mentioning, is that they do kind of do an Easter egg about the water chip being broken, which implies to me that maybe the vault that is at the beginning of the game is the vault that is at the beginning of Fallout 1. But there isn't an overall plot that is well defined there. It is very much a mystery box and a MacGuffin as far as what they're chasing after and why. Whereas you have a much stronger plot in Fallout 3 where your father goes missing and you're chasing after your father, which is literally the same plot in the Fallout TV series. But then that leads you to a lot more side quests, and then there's an eventual realization that what you're doing is going to end up like potentially purifying all of the water and deradiating all the water in the Commonwealth in Fallout 3. Which, you know, now I think about it, way too much of the Fallout TV series is just a one-for-one plot of Fallout 3. Which isn't too different from all the plots in Fallout 4 or Fallout New Vegas. I need to play New Vegas. I've never played it to be more confident about what I think it is about. I think, but weirdly it just feels like they did it slightly worse in the TV series. At the end of Fallout 3, you really knew people were suffering and that your actions were going to cause people either to suffer or not suffer in that final decision. At the end of the Fallout TV series, they literally tease that a button needs to be pressed, and then there's just a point there where it looks like they were going to finish the whole series and not even push the button and just leave you on a cliffhanger, which would have been incredibly annoying. The fact that they even teased it was annoying. But I mean, that's pretty much it, is that a button needs to be pressed and the button's pressed, but you don't know what is actually going to happen when the button is pressed. They don't explain it. It just doesn't seem like it was high enough priority. Like in like the second episode or so, the character says that you can change the world, and that's it. No explanation on how or why. Almost done here. Yeah, I do feel like the more, here's another adult game, the more I think about Fallout, the more I let it settle as a TV series, I think the worse I feel about it. And it definitely feels like it was rushed. There's like one point, very noticeably, where they were obviously planning on having the main female protagonist talk to this mutated person that has like one eye. And so she says he very clearly when referencing the person she's talking to. And at some point they changed it. This is some kind of weird feet fetish app, I guess. It's not even particularly that interesting, I think. I don't know what feet fetishists really want there, though. I feel like feet fetishists probably want to see butts and legs too, not just feet exclusively, but I could be wrong there. But yeah, there's definitely a point there where it would have been more of a CGI conversation and they just had a second in command character talking otherwise. And so it was a she instead of a he. But the fact that no script supervisor heard that and recognized it and it made it to the footage just shows that they probably rushed production and that they were being somewhat cheap. Which, yeah, there's a lot of CGI that's perhaps unnecessary. But I almost assume the CGI budget would be higher than your average show just because of all the CGI that would be necessary. There's never anybody that's just wearing what looks like a makeup. Like, it is not Star Trek 1 or Star Trek 2 where you're just wearing masks or having things glued onto your face. It definitely feels like it's all computer generated CGI stuff. Although inherently they could have fixed their budget by just not having random celebrities show up. There's at least 3 people that show up. No, at least 4 that didn't need to be there and broke the uncanny valley, the realism factor, because you're seeing celebrities show up instead of just having actors who would be best for the role show up in these small side appearances. And yeah, Fallout is really not the show to have cameos and celebrities show up. Alright, well, let's look at SteamDB as far as the 24-hour peak goes. We've got Counter-Strike 2 still always way higher. Counter-Strike 2, I assume, in CSGO was what it was called before, has to just be full of way more bots, like 2 or 3 times as many bots as any other game to always maintain such high numbers. And you can see Fallout 4 here has made it to... Let's actually look at Fallout 4 in a second. But yeah, it's up with 83,000 players to the 17th spot. Let's see if we can see another Fallout in the top 100. Fallout 76. Let's check Fallout 76 too. In the 45th spot. Will we get New Vegas to show up in the top 100? Laretro's way down here at the 75th spot. Fallout New Vegas in 96th spot. Soundpad way down here at the 99th spot, where it probably belonged a long time ago. As far as other things on this list though, still not really seeing new games come out. Like they definitely scheduled releasing the Fallout TV series at the perfect time as far as competition goes. And generally, if we look at my chart here, it does seem like we may have a bump in Baldur's Gate 3. Otherwise, everything seems to be somewhat trending downward as usual. And just like slow overall. So yeah, Fallout New Vegas is where we wanted to go. Are we actually going to go there? Come on. So, Fallout New Vegas has a 24-hour peak of 19,000. Its all-time peak as a single-player game was only 51,000. But yeah, it's very positive, overwhelmingly positive. I wanted to just show some things here that aren't in the Fallout TV series. These little robot guys aren't here. The more Australian type outfit is not there. Interface here to tell a companion is not there. You don't really consistently have any characters with a companion other than maybe a dog. Snipers and scopes aren't shown really. New California Republic is shown. Now, Fallout New Vegas is also on the West Coast, where the other games are all on the East Coast. I don't think anybody hits anybody in the head with a golf. Ghouls are shown, not really this wrinkly, though. Usually they look more like zombies. VATS is never shown. We don't see a strength test. And the stats as a concept are mentioned very much at the beginning, and super mutants aren't shown. And there's like one minigun that is shown, and that's it. Most of the guns are handguns. They are actually fired fairly infrequently. Rifles are not shown in the TV series. Now, there is a very specific in the TV show. I think it's the T-76 power armor that is shown, and that's it. So newer versions of the power armor are not really shown. This kind of character is not shown. Nothing looks this colorful or big in the Fallout TV series. No area looks that big. No really big exterior wall areas. No custom power armors. No ridiculous outfits. Pip-Boys are definitely shown. Yeah, as far as Fallout 76 goes, there's basically no actions. And I guess Fallout 76 here, they are saying happens 25 years after the bombs fell. So this would be a very early game. The only problem is that it is a MMO game, whereas I would much prefer to play a single player game that took place as the bombs were falling, not even 25 years after. Like, I would like to think that would be the most interesting area time frame, is that your people are getting bombed, cities are getting bombed left and right, and you're surviving as they are falling, as people are shooting them. But yeah, as far as Fallout 76, almost none of this is close to what was in the TV show. And yes, a fan gifted me Fallout 4, and I still haven't gotten around to playing it. And so I'm a really crappy content manager for doing that. Very positive. There is a dog. It's in the TV show. There isn't really a sense, and synthetics don't show up at all in the TV show. Like maybe one character. These characters don't show up, although you see a skull of one of these characters in the show. These kinds of robots don't show up. You don't see any big buildings at all. You don't really see any base building. Inside the vault you have buildings that are kind of like this. You do see one robot like this, and that's it. You see the Fallout Boy character, but even in that, the TV show kind of ruins this mascot character somewhat um, through backstory, and they kind of hurt it somewhat because there's this subtle implication that the Fallout Pip-Boy character here is actually designed to replace a major actor, the real protagonist of the Fallout series, who was an actor before he became a ghoul. So they've kind of ruined that. No mini nuke launchers, no skill shots and criticals, no interface like that. They spent a lot of budget in the Fallout TV series with having different Fallout logos in front of every episode, which is wasteful. No laser guns, no aliens, side quests, no giant robots in the TV series. I mean, even looking at these screenshots though, Fallout 4 doesn't even seem as interesting as it should. No customization or modification of the power armors. No super mutants. It would probably have been nice if there was a first person perspective of shooting guns. You see like a Red Rocket diner at one point, but you don't do anything with this. The special meters, they talk about that at the very beginning, but they don't really do anything around it as far as strength, perception, things like that. You never see a video like this or any kind of tutorialization. You never see the chart for getting different special skills. So there's just like a lot of room for improvement, I think, or elements that the Fallout TV series could have had. And I feel like if you had never played Fallout, going to play Fallout after watching the TV series is going to be a weird transition. There's going to be elements and characters that just aren't going to feel familiar, and I wouldn't be surprised if some people watch the Fallout TV series and really like it, and then they try to play Fallout 3 or Fallout 4 or Fallout 76, and it's just not going to feel like their Fallout to them at that point. All the Fallout games are on sale too, so Amazon.com is also somewhat lying here. The uptick in gameplay may very well have more to do with the games being on sale up to 80% than it does have to do with people being both intrigued by the TV series and playing the video games. There really hasn't been enough time. Some kind of fishing game. It's mixed most recently. It's 70% otherwise. I could see why it's not on my fall list. I did hear about something that apparently some kids are into. Somebody told me the name, and I looked it up, and it was on Steam, but I can't remember the name right now, and it's not in the top 10 list. Like, inherently, the thing there is that whatever may be big in one kid's school and amongst their group of friends may be very much exclusively to that one school and that one group of friends. It doesn't mean that it's gotten to a national level at which it would potentially be on the front page of Steam. And inherently, my front page on Steam is targeting games I've covered before and games I've played and wishlisted and such. So someone else's front page could be very much a different experience. Only a few things have to be the same. I did test out Lara Croft Go, which is not this game, on the Steam Deck, and yeah, it plays fine. There's really no reason why it wouldn't, being such a simplistic game. There is... Yeah, I recently played Clue Classic Edition, and now they're recommending Monopoly Plus, which is mixed reviewed. Ideally, I want Tabletop Simulator to work on the Steam Deck, but it says it doesn't actually work. But yeah, there is a danger, particularly on the front page, of the algorithm just feeding you games you've already played and not really promoting games that are anywhere connected, or just random games. Because yeah, as I'm scrolling down here, every single thing that's being recommended is being recommended based on something that's on the wish list. And everything on my wish list in particular doesn't inherently mean I actually want to play the game. It's just that it's good enough that I am willing to play it. But I may have no enthusiasm really to play a lot of games. Is Vampire Survivors. Alright, well, we don't really have a ton of headlines today, or a ton of news, so we'll burn through the headlines very quickly, and then that'll be it for today's stream. Hopefully I have enough momentum to do all of this without coughing all over the place. So let's go through the Video Games Chronicle articles. Final Fantasy XVI was successful in attracting younger players, says the DLC director. The series has been moving away from its turn-based combat roots to widen its appeal. The biggest problem here for me, though, is I'm not 100% sure which one was Final Fantasy XVI. I would have to assume that that is the medieval looking one that wasn't particularly as well received. I do think moving away from turn-based combat makes a lot of sense for a lot of these JRPGs that go on way too long, and just eliminating those slight pauses each time for more of a quick time event and an easier gameplay overall makes sense. But at the core of it, they're gonna have to just get rid of the grind to get a larger audience. Get rid of people fighting the same enemy more than once and wandering around in empty fields or going on side quests for pointless fetch items. Moving on. Lawbreakers 2.0 fan project makes Cliff Bleszinski's Dead first-person shooter playable again after 6 years. Clearly, this is an example of there being enough of a fandom, like that you're having entire fan projects make games playable again. UK games market grew 4.4% last year. Physical sales decline was better than expected. Nintendo won't be attending Gamescom 2024. A modder turns a PlayStation 1 console into a working handheld. The PS Hanami uses original hardware rather than emulation. So, this would be a case where he probably took the circuit board of a PlayStation 1 and cut it at very specific spots to squeeze it into a handheld console. Can it hold a disc? Or is it just running ROMs? And I wonder if maybe he didn't even have to cut the circuit board. Alright, so it can't do disk drives. So they're emulating a disk drive. Yeah, it says they took an original PlayStation 1 motherboard, cut it in half, folded it like a book, then rewired it. Interesting. And even doing that seemed to work. Then they integrated a DualShock controller, but only the rumble functionality, as there are no analog sticks, meaning a handful of games like Ape Escape wouldn't work on it. Well, at the end of the day, you can see these are 3D printed cases. It doesn't look terrible. It definitely is a very polished, like, do-it-yourself project that easily could be a prototype, and almost certainly it would be more interesting of a device to sell than the PlayStation Portal. And yet we know that this would never be something that would be emulated by Sony, because they would rather sell you an Android device with streaming services and reoccurring revenue than a device that would effectively still have an emulator in it, because it's emulating the disk drive. The disk drive is being emulated with the rest of the hardware. Sony probably doesn't have a warehouse of PlayStation 1 motherboards sitting around anyways, and they would almost certainly want a PlayStation 2 hardware in it. That is the weirdest part here, is that they did it for a PlayStation 1 instead of a PlayStation 2. You could probably do the same circuitry on either an FPGA or just a custom silicon print, way smaller, with multiple layers, and not do it the way a fan would have to do it. I definitely don't know if there's enough demand just for PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2. Inherently, Steam Deck could emulate a PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 game. I'm pretty sure they could emulate all of them. So some projects like this, you're going to see them increasingly wrap up and finish their projects, and you won't see anybody else start similar projects, because it'll just be more efficient to own a Steam Deck, and instead of doing it yourself. Some people will still do it themselves just as a matter of pride, but yeah, I have seen a noticed decrease of these kinds of projects in the past 2 or 3 years as the Steam Deck came out, and as the Raspberry Pi became just either too difficult to get a hold of or not powerful enough to do anything new with. Final Fantasy XIV benchmark tool lets PC players check if they can still run it after the Dawn Trail update. Seems kind of crazy to me that you would update your MMO and eliminate some of your player base by making it more demanding. Star Wars Outlaws locks Jabba the Hutt mission behind a $110 premium edition. Yep. We've already had several negative announcements or stories around Star Wars Outlaws. It is deservedly going to fail, in my opinion, and if it succeeds, the video game industry will be worse for it. But yeah, and it probably will fail. It's not like there's that many hardcore Star Wars fans left that would just buy anything at the highest price. Fallout games see Steam player counts more than triple following the TV show's release. Again, it's worth pointing out all the Fallout games are on sale at the moment, also on Steam. Japanese Pokemon Scarlet and Violet hacker has been arrested for selling modified Pokemon. I don't like when also that they say they try to make it seem like the criminal did something more, or the accused did something more nefarious just because they maybe made millions of dollars on it. It's like, in this case in particular, it doesn't seem like at any point they're saying he stole millions of yen. It's just saying that he found people who were willing to pay him millions of yen for modified Pokemon. Which, yeah, I could tell you, almost any little kid would probably pay a few bucks for a modified Pokemon. Just because they want to win and they want the game easier. If anything, this really is a statement around the Pokemon game being too difficult and too grindy for its target audience, that there is a desire amongst its player base to buy modified Pokemon, and the modifications and stats are too complicated, obviously, in Pokemon, that you need to hack and make modified Pokemon, or you feel the need to. Former Blizzard boss suggests players should be able to tip developers after finishing a game. Yep. Mike Ybarra saying most people will dislike the idea. I definitely dislike the idea. I think he's right about that. I think he's wrong about the idea that players should be able to tip. EA's Black Panther game will be open world, a job ad is suggesting. Persona 1 and 2 remakes are coming, it's claimed. Persona 3 remake came earlier this year. That is certainly something that would catch my attention a little bit more. That being said, I have no idea who these characters are. I don't know if this is from Persona 1 and this is from Persona 2. I think the visual style here looks fairly different from Persona 1 and Persona 2. I mean Persona 3 and Persona 5 and Persona 4. The remakes for Persona 1 may be very rough because Persona 3 was not a particularly full-on remake either. Was it a full remake? They're saying it's a full remake. I feel like it was more of a remaster than a remake. Now is certainly the time for them to make remakes of Persona 1 and 2, but I fully admit that even the new fan base of Persona players may not be willing to go that far into the past. And it doesn't feel like the story really matters enough that you need to play Persona 1 or Persona 2. Even Persona 3 may not really be mandatory. Square Enix hopes to develop Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 in about 3 years. Rockstar has raised GTA prices by up to 40%. And see, that's all I have from VideoGamesChronicle.com today since I started so early. And I have even less of Gematsu today. I have only like 5 articles, so we'll go through these headlines very quickly. Horror visual novel Horrific Xanatorium launches April 26th for all consoles and PC. Let's see, we've got a Steam link for this, so let's see what this looks like. Okay. Looks like a visual novel. Can't really tell much more than that. I wouldn't put a lot of faith into it, but I'll make a YouTube short on it regardless. I did have somebody comment on one of my YouTube shorts and say thanks for promoting our game, and then they said let us know if you actually choose to stream it. Yeah, I am pretty much still maintaining the rule of not directly communicating with video game companies in one way or the other. I appreciate them saying thanks, but you at most are going to get a heart and a thumbs up on that comment, and that's it. I'm not going to really communicate or try to get free copies of games or things like that. That's just not, it's not worth compromising your integrity potentially for a free game at this point. I've gotten a couple of free games, maybe one free game before from a developer, and I think I got a free copy of a game after I'd already bought the game. But yeah, I don't want to have to remember that, oh, I got this game for free, therefore it's legally a sponsorship, and I don't want to have to do any of that nonsense. This week's Japanese game releases: Doku Yisei Banging Summer, Dave the Diver for PS5 and PS4, and more. Let's see. Doku Yisei. I don't know how you pronounce that. But yeah, it still feels fairly slow that you have like Ark Survival Ascended, kind of an old game, which was already available digitally, coming out for the PS5, and then a visual novel for PS4 and Switch, and then UFO Grenadier. I'm not pronouncing anything right today for PS4 and 5. The digital list here does seem longer than we had seen in the past couple of weeks, but physical list here seems really slow. Spike Chunsoft to publish Mages, the quintessential quintuplets games in the West. This was an anime that came out a few seasons ago, where it's one protagonist basically in a visual novel style in a harem anime, and then you have quintuplet sisters, 5 sisters, and I think the general theme is that eventually in the future he's going to marry like one of the quintuplets, and it was supposed to be kind of a question as to who he was going to marry, but in the anime it seemed like it was pretty obvious that there was one that he preferred over the others. It's an interesting twist when you have 5 quintuplets who are all supposed to be like born at the same time, twins, maybe not identical twins, and yet for the anime need to make the characters look different, every single character has different hairstyles, different hair colors. They all have the same eye color, and yeah, body types are pretty much the same, so nobody's significantly shorter or significantly taller or larger breasted or things like that. So you're still not really getting that much variety. It's all going to come down to personality in the visual novel dating games, I would assume. They are dating games, romance visual novels. But obviously the series must be popular enough to justify them coming to the West. Anyways, moving on. Evil God Corone is now available for the PS4 and Switch. This previously has been on Steam. And you can see it's some kind of horror visual novel. Well, they're not really tagging it as visual novel, they're saying it's an adventure horror story-rich game. I still suspect it probably is in the category of visual novels. Well, I guess not. And even Komatsu is not labeling it as a visual novel. Alright, I rescind my assumption there. And then finally, Stellar Blade Developer Diary Episode 1 The Journey is available on Komatsu. We'd already kind of scrubbed through that developer diary. Another one has not been released. It's been been quiet over the weekend for Stellar Blade, which is probably good. There is a danger, certainly, of oversaturation and overhyping the game. Now I'd just like to see the game come out and see what happens from that point. And we have some GameDeveloper.com articles, maybe. Let's see. The UK video games and interactive entertainment sector has been valued at £7.82 billion in 2023. Feels like old news, but okay. Interactive entertainment, I guess in general, wouldn't be that big of a net outside of video games. And we had already talked about Content Warning selling 1 million copies following its launch giveaway. And then Crash 4, It's About Time, having sold over 5 million copies. So there really isn't even anything new to talk about. £7.82 billion might be a fairly high number considering they're putting that in the UK alone. Although, if technically it's including all of the United Kingdom, that's still a fairly large group of places. And that's going to be the end of the show. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, and keep on watching. Thanks.